So, our 5 cloud promises. We aim to provide global reach and scale with local expertise to help you enter and serve new markets. Our BlueSky platform and our investments are truly global, as is our relationships with our vendor agencies that we're bringing on board, and the expertise that we're looking to take as we develop best practice across the world. We systematically identify and qualify and onboard new vendors for the most comprehensive cloud solutions portfolio. Dome9 is a fantastic example of an exciting new technology coming to market that we've been able to identify from the US, and have really been able to not only take this here in Australia but also regionally within our business. Our third promise is to enable you to thrive in the digital services market. We also want to keep you at the center of the digital services lifecycle, ensuring you profit from every transaction. We believe that the cloud is very much the center of the cloud is with you. We believe that forward channels offer the best opportunity for maximizing profitability and growth, and the ability of our partners to thrive and have success with the digital services lifecycle starts with profitability at every transaction, and looking for the ability to maximize our marginal profitability with all aspects of our public cloud business. We also offer hybrid solutions to help you meet your customers' needs. Our BlueSky Cloud and Services Management Platform keeps you at the center of the digital services lifecycle. BlueSky allows our vendors and resellers to quickly operate a cloud-based business, providing an easy way to market, brand, order, and deliver services. The platform includes powerful analytics to give you and our partners and resellers visibility into important service metrics, including user information, user trends, service ticket information, and top vendors. This now includes security analytics and compliance with the BlueSky Security Analytics Compliance Service. We're excited to have added the BlueSky Security Analytics Compliance Service to our BlueSky offering, so you can deliver the latest cloud security and compliance offerings to your customers. I'll now hand over to Patrick at Dome9 to take you through the security challenges customers are facing and the importance of having this enterprise-class security solution to ensure that your cloud environments are secure and compliant. Over to you, Patrick, and may I ask again that people mute their phones.
Thank you, Reese, and hi, everybody. Dome9 participates in a cloud security survey each year, and this year, visibility, compliance, and a synonym for compliance, really, consistency and security policy, round out the top 3 cloud management challenges. And visibility is that, ability to understand what I consider your security situational awareness, right? Having the perspectives to understand our security controls and how they relate to each other to form your overall policy is a real critical first step. Once that's achieved, keeping those controls consistent gives us the confidence we need to scale out our public cloud efforts without compromising on security. So really, when we think about who this is important to, there are 3 primary consumers of cloud security capabilities and controls. First, security operations or SecOps, right? This group focuses on the day-to-day management of security controls, exception handling, and responding to security events in a timely manner. Their biggest challenges are visibility and the management of many control planes. For example, network security, access permissions, multi-cloud scenarios. The list really goes on. Second, compliance and governance. So GRC teams are responsible for instilling consistency across cloud and multi-cloud scenarios, which can be a real challenge when you factor in different use cases across business units and ultra-dynamic infrastructure that scales based on demand, for example. So effective governance requires an automated and systematic approach rather than a manual test and response cycle. And then lastly, DevOps, or maybe ideally SecDevOps. DevOps builds capabilities to rapidly publish and update software. And for many organizations, security is either an afterthought or in some cases isn't a thought at all. So to be consistent with an organizational security policy, automated means of testing the state of security controls throughout this process or life cycle is really required. And then ideally, automated response and remediation should really also be key in remaining confident that the pace of what we do in operations does not occur at the cost of consistent security. I think we missed a slide. Nope, okay, no problem. So as mentioned before, we brand the Westcon-Comstor Dome9 product family ARC. And ARC stands for Assess, Remediate, and Control. So Assess is really all about visibility and the tools and perspectives required to understand how security controls relate to each other for quick identification of misconfigurations. Right? No longer do you have to hunt and peck across several interfaces, or even worse, several cloud providers in multi-cloud scenarios to really understand your effective security policy. And then Remediate takes that knowledge and really puts it into action. Right? Without leaving the console, we fix problems previously identified with enhanced capabilities over the native tools of each respective cloud platform. And then lastly, we control going forward to ensure that we find it, we fix it, and we keep it fixed. So once security problems are found and fixed, it's critical that configuration drift does not occur to really compromise our efforts. So with features like tamper protection and automatic compliance-driven remediation, we no longer have to worry about the life cycle of our cloud environment deviating from our desired configuration. So I think with that, we'll pause here and we'll launch into the demo. Great, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. Welcome to the Dome9 console. And as we lead to the demo here today, we'll start with this notion of visibility. This does really remain the primary top concern across every survey we do, across every industry survey that we pay attention to. And certainly there are several capabilities within the Dome9 platform that speak to visibility, but none so much as a feature we have called Clarity. And when we take a look at Clarity, the first thing we're going to do as we enter the feature is pick one of our cloud accounts and one of the respective regions as soon as it loads up here. But before we do, we should mention this top button here called CloudFormation. And what this has to do with is, if our customers are working with paradigms like immutable infrastructure or continuous integration, continuous delivery, kind of those things that fit in that DevOps bucket that we talked about earlier, if they're expressing their intent in code, which is often the case, you can upload CloudFormation templates to this Dome9 feature called Clarity and get the very same illustration that I'm about to show you, except we're going to do it against a live environment. So just know that Dome9 can be very much involved in the pre-provisioning sort of life cycle of cloud infrastructure as well, not just in the consideration of live infrastructure. But for this example, let's go ahead and pick one of our accounts. In this case, it'll be our AWS production demo account and one of our regions. And you'll notice, and I'll just zoom this up a bit, this is probably a little bit tough to read. What you see here are different VPCs within an AWS account and a region in this case, and how they relate to each other. So as you can see, we have kind of a familiar hub and spoke model here where perhaps the center VPC is dealing with ingress and egress traffic and maybe routing it to each different tier of the application. That's one example where you might see an infrastructure or an architecture like this. But really this is to understand again how each VPC might relate to each other. They might not relate at all. If I go down to the bottom, I can see some VPCs here as kind of islands, right? These are segregated, fully independent VPCs that maybe have one particular business purpose, whereas these are truly related through peering relationships. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper. We're going to pick a particular VPC, in this case, one called the main demo VPC, and we're going to click our security group view button. We get a small synopsis on what we can expect inside for resources before we do, but let's click that security group view. And here's where clarity really shines. What you see next are AWS Security Groups arranged in a port exposure kind of way. So I did not prep, this at all. If I'm a customer of Dome9 and I sign up and it's connected in a policy and a role kind of way, not in a agent or appliance kind of way. There's no data to load into your cloud environment at all. You basically create a role and you create a policy, and Dome9 uses that role to gain information and knowledge about your cloud infrastructure. As soon as that happens, 5 minutes after signing up, you can get an illustration like this. And what you're looking at are the security groups of this particular VPC arranged in various swim lanes. So you can see, for example, that my load balancer security group is here in what we call the DMZ swim lane. And it's there because it has one or more firewall rules that are very, very permissive, that basically allow all traffic in. And as I click it, on the right-hand side, you can see exactly which rule that is. In this case, it's a secure web HTTPS rule that allows all internet traffic in. Now, this isn't necessarily a configuration mistake or problem. In the case of a load balancer, it's almost expected, right? That's often the job of a load balancer, is to take broad traffic in, judge it, and then decide where to send it deeper into your network. But the fact that I have a default security group here is a problem, right? Not only is the best practice not to use that default security group ever, but in this case, I can see it's used, and because I see this number 1 in the top right-hand side of the security group, I know there's a resource assigned to it. So a quick look to the detail pane on the right, and I can see that I have a secure shell firewall rule that allows, the whole internet, basically an any rule in. So this is a real problem. And this is the intent of clarity, is to make sure you understand that, what you likely architected through a very, very different interface than what you see here is what you intended to do. So if we work our way from the left to right, these security groups in the partially open swim lane, they allow traffic in, but not nearly as broadly as those in that DMZ swim lane. So here I have a security group protecting my web servers, and I've got a bunch of rules in orange which allow, again, traffic in, but not the whole entire internet, right? Some sort of whitelisted access. And that's typically very common. And that's a little bit different than back here in the internal zone, where these security groups only trust other security groups in this VPC or private hosts in this VPC. They do not trust traffic from the outside. So, this tier, the internal zone tier, is where you'd expect to see all your sensitive data, your database servers, your message queues, that sort of thing. So very quickly you can tell, are my security groups where I intend them to be? And by clicking on them, not only is the ranking system there to provide us a level of assurance that we've got our security controls configured properly, but as I click on them, you can see that I can tell exactly where all the traffic is permitted to flow in and where the traffic is permitted to flow out. So for example, from DB servers, I'm accepting traffic from App1 servers. I'm sending traffic to my web monitor, my common SG, and my monitoring security group. So it's this interactive sort of exploratory nature of clarity that really, again, gives us that satisfaction, that trust, that confidence that what we built, likely through a very different interface, if we're talking about the AWS, the Azure, or the Google console, is exactly what we intended. The effectively internal category is a little bit special. This means that you've got security groups which may allow traffic from the outside in, but because the resources assigned to these security groups have private interfaces, said another way, they're not publicly accessible, they are internal, yet their firewall rules do allow outside traffic in. So we like to consider these kind of one small configuration step away from being potentially vulnerable to the outside public internet. As you know, it's very, very simple for a quick click of a button within the AWS console, or a quick API call, and suddenly a network interface is now public where it used to be private. So we call these resources out very clearly in the effectively internal category. Now, one other thing Clarity is very, very good at is overlaying VPC flow log information. So if you're familiar with flow logs, these are your traffic firewall logs, firewall filter logs delivered as a service from AWS. So if I click this checkbox, Dome9 goes out and retrieves all this information on demand. This data, the flow log data, is not data that gets stored permanently. So we go out to, as you see, it takes about 7 to 10 seconds to pull. And now you see these little red legends on the bottom right of each security group. And these little red legends tell us how much dropped traffic each security group has processed relative to the rest. So I can see, for example, my default security group has dropped more traffic than has common SG, than has monitoring, or than has web servers. And the one curious question I ask myself when I look at these relative indications of dropped traffic is, if my database servers back here in this internal zone are only open to private resources in my VPC, why is it dropping more traffic than anything else? And that's a question we can answer with a different view. Right now we're looking at security group view. Let's pivot to what we call the effective policy view. When we do that, we're going to move away from looking at distinct security groups, and let me zoom this up a little bit so it's a little more readable. Now we're looking at common groups of policy. So as you likely know, within AWS, it's very trivial to assign one resource to multiple security groups, and that's what you see. Here we've got one resource assigned to both DB servers and default. Namely, we have an instance called DB1 that is assigned to DB servers, but it looks like potentially mistakenly it was also assigned to the default security group. And because of that multi-security group membership, it's inherited the rule from the default security group that we looked at earlier, this wide open SSH, TCP port 22. And that is a very, very dangerous combination of multi-security group assignment. And that's what the effective policy view of Clarity really is very good at illustrating. So now that really answers the question of why in our database security group we have so much drop traffic. It's because one of those resources, DB1, is also assigned to the default security group. And that default security group has a rule in it that accepts traffic from the entire internet. So that's a problem. So I think about this effective policy view as sort of the operational view, as compared to the last view we looked at, the security group view, as kind of the architecture view. You know, this is what I want to occur. The effective policy view is what's really occurring due to that multi-security group membership perspective. On the left-hand side, you might expect to see all the traffic sources as raw IP address information. After all, that's typically how we architect our security groups, right? We either specify a single IP or a range of IPs as whitelisted against a service. Dome9 has a feature called IP lists, where you can arrange IP addresses into higher level objects, English describable objects, such that they make a lot of sense at a glance in a feature like Clarity. So for example, if I click on this list, now I can see that I actually have 4 IP addresses assigned to this list. And what that means is if I onboard a partner tomorrow, and I want them to have the very same access that each of my other partners have, I don't have to sort of walk through each security group that has my partners defined. I can simply add a 5th IP address to this list, and that'll propagate out to everywhere that I use this partner extranet SRv1 object. So not only is it really useful for immediate comprehension like you see us doing here in Clarity, it's also very useful for security at scale. So that's a very, very quick overview of Clarity. Again, Clarity is the defining visibility feature within Dome9. It's not the only one. Next, we're going to take a look at the compliance and governance feature set, which certainly as well speaks to visibility at a very, very fine-grained level of detail. But again, Clarity is very, very useful to make sure that what you architected, again, in an interface that probably looks nothing like this, is exactly what you intended to do. So let's do that now. Let's pivot over to the compliance side and have a look at all the different capabilities afforded to us here. So when we think about compliance and governance, we think about judging our infrastructure against a set of rules, either pre-published rules, things like standards like PCI, standards like high-tech, or maybe less formal standards like CIS, AWS Foundation benchmarks. Or maybe even less formal than that, best practices from our integration partners like AWS, Azure, or Google. No matter what we're interested in testing, and for sake of argument, let's take our PCI bundle. you'll note that the kinds of things we can measure are quite a bit wider than standard network security. So Dome9 has sort of grown up in the network security side, measuring things like port exposure, the kind of things that we just looked at within Clarity. The compliance engine, though, has a much wider perspective than that. We can look at security groups, instances, identity and access management policies, hosted databases, S3 storage security, key rotation in AWS KMS, and much, much more. And so as we look down the list of rules within this PCI bundle, and again, this bundle is off the shelf. As soon as you begin with Dome9, you can run this PCI compliance bundle against any portion of the infrastructure you manage with Dome9. So we do things like ensure logging is turned on, ensure that you are not logging in regularly and using the root account, which, as we know, is very much a best practice. Making sure that we have password policies defined and enforced. Making sure we have CloudTrail logged on, CloudTrail turned on rather, and enabled in all regions, and so on. And so we'll take this PCI bundle and let's run this. And when we do, we're able to choose whether we want to run this across one or multiple accounts. In this case, we'll stick with our AWS prod example. We can also get a lower level than that if we'd like to run it in a particular region or even against a particular virtual private cloud. In this case, though, we'll leave this all. We'll run it against our complete AWS prod account. And you'll see very quickly that we'll take these 76 rules and we'll evaluate them across our entire AWS production demo account. And you can see here, we've got about a 30-70% pass-fail ratio, which isn't very good. The top half of this report is really built for that management perspective, that compliance officer that's interested in information at aggregate. And we can do things like understand our failures by severity, understand what kinds of entities we've tested. So in this case, we've tested about 60% security groups, about 18% instances, and so on. Some IAM rules, some S3 bucket permissions, really depending on what rules were in this PCI bundle. The second half of the screen, however, is really what the practitioner will be mostly interested in, right? That group that's going to be tasked to go and solve the problems that are found by the compliance engine data. So we can move down the list, and here's one that really everyone's going to be familiar with. Here's a test that says make sure there are no security groups that allow very broad kind of any traffic in via SSH. So out of 219 security groups that I tested, 12 didn't comply or failed. And if I click this expand button, I can find exactly which security groups failed. So if I take a look and let's click on this security group here, and I'll open it up in a tab. So now we can delve into, let's log in again. Looks like my session is stale. Here we go. This is our default security group. So we're looking at one particular failure. We can manage this rule with Dome9. So Dome9 is more than information and reporting. You can actively manage security settings without leaving the console. So no need to jump from Dome9 to AWS to other cloud consoles in a multi-cloud scenario. You can do it all through Dome9. So in this case, sure enough, I find the offending rule, SSH, is wide open. So now I can go ahead and I can edit that. I can sequester that down to a single IP or a range, or I can turn it off and use features like dynamic access leasing. We're not going to go over that feature today. We don't quite have enough time. But dynamic access leasing is all about the ability to open a port for a very time-limited fashion and for a particular user. It's really controlled exception handling, if you will, such that you can open up a service for one user and one user only for a limited amount of time, and then that lease will expire, and that will then be closed again for the sort of general accessibility of the port. Rather than having a port open full-time to everybody, dynamic access leasing makes a lot of sense when you think about allowing kind of time-based access to limited people for limited time. But back to the compliance engine, that's really how the compliance engine gets leveraged is, information aggregate up top, and then the specific failures for each kind of test we performed as part of the bundle. So let's go back then to the main screen within compliance and talk a little bit about the flexibility inherent in the approach with Dome9 compliance. So far, we've picked a rule bundle, a pre-published rule bundle that ships with Dome9. We've executed against our environment. What also is possible, however, is to take this and augment it with rules that are important to your own organization. So we've developed a domain-specific language that we call GSL, or Governance Specification Language. And this allows you to write your own rules. So not only do you have to pick sort of off the shelf of what comes with Dome9, but you're able to write your own rules. And I've got a couple of them published down here. Looks like my bundle was actually, oh, here we are. So for example, if I have very specifically named templates, in Amazon lingo, these are called AMIs. I can measure all of my instances across all of my regions, across all of my cloud accounts, and make sure that every running virtual machine or image is based on those templates. So here, for example, I wrote a rule that said instances should be based on one of 3 pre-approved AMIs. And I named them arbitrarily. Of course, these names would likely make sense in your environment. But if I run this, this will tell me of every existing virtual machine, are they all based on pre-approved AMIs, or have some of them been spun up kind of rogue or through different use cases? So this is how I can write a rule that's very, very specific to my environment, or augment those rules that are shipped with, you know, the pre-approved bundles like PCI with specific conditions. So let's go ahead and write a rule ourselves. If you're familiar with the language, you can do just as I've done here. I can write the rule in text, and away I go. Although it's very straightforward and English readable, right? If you've ever had to do this in different technologies, typically this involves writing code, you know, JavaScript or something like that. Here, of course, within GSL, our intent is to get very much closer to the policy creator themselves, being able to write these rules rather than having to rely on a developer skill set. I'll ask if everyone can mute their lines, please. Thank you. If I'm not familiar with the language, I can use what we have called the rule builder. And this allows me to follow a guided process to author a rule against any of the kinds of entities that are supported within the Dome9 compliance engine. So rather than look at a network security rule again, let's look at something identity and access management based. So in this case, I might be interested in say, okay, my IAM policy should have MFA enabled. So this allows me to test, okay, for any given cloud account, do I have account-wide MFA mandated or not? This isn't testing whether any particular user has MFA turned on or off. We can do that as well. But this rule says, do I have, as a policy, IAM, mandatory IAM turned on? So then as I've got my rule built, I can click test and sort of unit test this rule to make sure it works. Now, if you're using the rule builder, it will likely always work because it's a guided process. And here I can see that in my one account, it does not have mandatory MFA turned on. And so it's that easy to write a rule that is important to your organization that might not come in one of the existing bundled sets. So inherent in the compliance engine is also a compliance dashboard, whereby I can tell exactly across all the accounts I manage with Dome9 when a compliance run, if and when a compliance run was executed and what the results were. So I can see, for example, across my PCI bundles, this is the run we just did. It's 8:25 p.m. my local time here today, and if you remember, this was our pass ratio, 30.26%. The last one before this, I can sort of keep scrolling through the history and understand exactly when these tests were executed. So the compliance dashboard is kind of a quick view into if and when different compliance tests were executed. For a little bit of a deeper dive, we also have an assessment history where I can tell exactly when and where compliance runs were executed, and I can even delve into the specifics of each one. So for this one we just ran, I can sort of bring it up post-run and then get another feel for, at this point in time, what my compliance scenario was like. And we certainly encourage any user of the compliance and governance feature set to have a Dome9 account because, of course, this is an interactive report. I can click per region. I can understand exactly how I did. In this case, this region actually performed quite a bit better than my worldwide average. Maybe this should be the model for how I govern my infrastructure. But point being is, if you're not a Dome9 user, you can also share these compliance reports in a printable sort of PDF fashion. And which one you choose kind of depends on what you're looking to do. But know that you can also do this and send these reports via email. So then lastly, we talked about two features really, really big on visibility: clarity within the network security realm, and then the compliance and governance side. Let's then look at one of the active features from Dome9 called IAM Safety. And IAM Safety is really all about identity and access management protection. And IAM Safety, think about it as your last stop of protection in kind of the worst case scenario you can imagine. If I'm able to compromise your credentials, any sort of power user credentials, normally that's kind of a lights out kind of compromise, right? If I can steal your username password, if I can log in as you with malicious intent, start deleting databases, I mean, this is how some of the worst sort of ransomware scenarios we've heard of begin. If I can socially engineer, if I can hijack, if I can phish your credentials and log in as you, that's often a very, very disastrous scenario. So IAM Safety is built for that specific situation. And the process begins by you considering all of these services that you use within AWS and the different operations available. So for example, the ability to delete a storage bucket, for example, that's often a capability that you would want very much protected from really anybody, especially those that, again, can compromise credentials and log in as your most privileged users. Deleting an S3 storage bucket is typically disastrous to the applications you have running on AWS. So this might be one of the things you really want to restrict and protect. But you would work through all the different services within the portfolio of what you use within AWS. Another really key service might be Route 53, kind of how you manage DNS within AWS. Typically, an attacker would, one of the sort of prime ways that an attacker might take over your infrastructure is to log into AWS, manipulate DNS to send your application users to a false website, collect usernames and passwords, and away you go. Do very sort of malicious and disastrous things. So Route 53 might be another service that you want to protect, as an example. So you walk through all the different services, and this is what you're doing is you're building what we call your restricted policy. That's step one. Step two then is to consider all of your IAM users and or all of your IAM roles that you wish to protect. And you can do this kind of piecemeal, user by user, or you can do this with the Protect All button. And the Protect All button will, if I click this, it'll take away all of the rights we just put in that restricted policy from every IAM user. And similarly, if I do this here, every IAM role. So that's step two. Step three then is considering who of your trusted users you actually want to have this ability to, for example, delete an S3 bucket, or as the second example we gave, edit and manipulate your DNS settings. Because, of course, there will be a stable of trusted users whose job it is, maybe not day-to-day, but from time to time, to administer these sensitive services. For those users, you're going to pair them up with a Dome9 out-of-band application. This application runs only on mobile devices, so iOS and Android. It does not run within the same configuration plane, if you will, your workstation that you typically use to do administration. And this is important, right? If we consider what's happened to MFA, for example, MFA is a very, very great control, and we certainly recommend the use of it. However, MFA used to be sort of powered via independent devices, but now, of course, with the evolution of tools like Authy, tools like, really, there's many of them, you can also run them on a workstation. And it's trivial for an attacker to install something on a PC that sits there and listens for your master password, and all of a sudden MFA is kind of this this compromisable plane where it once wasn't. So for us, we built the IAM Safety application only accessible on a mobile device. And now what your trusted users will have to do is before they go and execute one of these sensitive services, they'll have to authenticate in a different way, an additional way to what they do with a standard logon, even with MFA enabled. So rather than talk about it some more, let me show you how this works. If I'm here at the AWS console, and let's look at the attacker view first. So I'm able to steal your credentials. I log into your AWS console, and let's go with that second example we talked about. I want to edit your DNS and reroute your legitimate traffic to a site that I've built up to phish passwords. As soon as I do that, as soon as I go, I can see that although I know I've stolen very privileged credentials, for some reason when I log in now, I have no privilege to do anything. And that's because the network administrator that's using Dome9 has put everything to do with this Route 53 service in their IAM Safety restricted policy. So this is, one way, even with a credential attack, that we're able to put another line of defense between us and those with malicious intent. So now let's look at the happy path, right? The trusted administrator that comes in and has to do legitimate work here. They too will log in and get this kind of interface. But now they have access, and I've got an Android simulator here, to use the IAM Safety application. Of course, this takes some pre-setup. Now I can elevate my rights, and I've got this configured to do this for a short period of time, so 15 minutes. So now I can elevate my rights for a short period of time. I'll come back to the console. I'll click reload, and sometimes this takes just a few minutes to propagate through. And now you'll see for the next 15 minutes, I have the ability to do what I need to do. And that's, again, because my administrator paired me up with this Dome9 IAM Safety out-of-band application. I have a 15-minute window to perform these sensitive actions. And then at the end of 15 minutes, or if I'm security conscious and I come back and I actively press the stop button, I'll fall back to that less privileged state. And I'm sure some of you who are familiar with sudo or su under Linux or even UAC under Windows are seeing some parallels here, right? Under Linux, if I have to do something sensitive, I can sudo or su for a short period of time, gain a higher level of privilege, do that action, and then fall back to my underprivileged state for my day-to-day operations. And this is a very similar paradigm to how Dome9 IAM Safety works. So that's very much a crash course in 3 core capabilities of Dome9, but hopefully that gives you a feel for the kinds of tools inherent in the platform, the visibility that Dome9 really gives you back in terms of, we've really been looking at single cloud scenarios, but these features work across all multi-cloud scenarios as well. So Clarity works the same for AWS as it does for Azure, as it does for Google, and that's definitely true for the compliance and governance engine as well. So, it's these capabilities that give you back that visibility, that control, and the ability even to do things like auto-remediation based on the findings of the compliance engine. With that, we'll pass it back to Reese. Okay, so to sum up then, let's review what makes Dome9 such a powerful security orchestration platform. Dome9 is easy with rapid time to value, right? We talked about no agents, no appliances to load in your cloud environment. It's software as a service based and deploys into any environment in minutes and begins to provide that perspective you need to find security problems immediately. Once you build a role and a policy, really, in under 5 minutes, Dome9 will give you that visibility within Clarity. It'll give you the ability to execute compliance assessments, and it'll get you started very, very quickly. Dome9 combines both visibility and control in one tool and offers in-place remediation, as we looked at that security group setting where I can change things. It's not information only. I can effect change within my security policy within Dome9. And really sort of, remediate in place and continually enforce going forward. Never again will that life cycle of your cloud security efforts really compromise your security. Dome9 has support for many regulatory and best practice-driven compliance scenarios, again, with the ability to customize and fine-tune with respect to what's important from an organizational perspective. Because of that deep API integrated nature of how the platform works, Dome9 has a wide perspective over much more than just virtual machines, right? Databases as a service, Lambda functions, load balancers, and much more. They're all discovered, measured, and controlled via Dome9. Dome9 is fully API enabled, which means it can fit into your existing processes and be used in non-interactive and pragmatic ways. Right? You can trip these compliance assessments, for example. We showed you the interactive way to do it today, but you can do this by API as well. So imagine the power of being able to, at the start of a change window, run a compliance assessment, effect a bunch of change, and then at the end of a change window, trip another compliance assessment and do a comparison between the two, right? Making sure nothing you've done as part of that change window has brought you out of that compliance state. So lastly, Dome9 has multi-cloud support, right, across AWS, Azure, and the Google Cloud Platform to ensure consistency in your approach to security across all platforms. So as a review, we really talked about the 3 pillars within the Dome9 Arc product family. We talked about network security, and we looked at clarity. There are certainly many more capabilities within the platform. We alluded to one called dynamic access leasing that we didn't look at within the demo, but there's a handful more that really speak to visibility and control over your network security posture. Then we looked at compliance and governance, which is your ability to either take off-the-shelf compliance standards or to build your own or any combination thereof using that expressive language GSL, or governance specification language. And then lastly, we looked at advanced IAM protection with IAM Safety, being able to categorize those capabilities from AWS that you deem the most sensitive and add an added layer of protection with just-in-time authorization via that out-of-band application available for either iOS or Android.
Thank you, Patrick. So we've now come to the Q&A section of the presentation. I've got a couple of questions here for you, Patrick, to start off with, if you don't mind. The first question is, how is BlueSky Security Analytics and Compliance Service different from what AWS and Azure provide?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, certainly there are tools within each respective cloud platform that give you a level of visibility, but I think you'll agree that within tools like Clarity, for example, what Dome9 really strives to do is give you context, right? Looking at security controls in isolation, it will only get you so far. Looking at how security controls relate to paint this picture of overall potential of network traffic flow, for example, is vastly more powerful. And we're used to some of these tools from our data center days, right? Net flow diagrams and that sort of thing. And really what Dome9 tries to do is bring that level of capability to the public cloud. So that's one side. Probably the other side is within the compliance and governance side, and I alluded to this, I think, in the demo, whereby if you're trying to assert on something very, very specific to your organization, that typically takes code development. Writing scripts or writing, even within AWS, writing code to go and evaluate these conditions which aren't supported out of the box. Within Dome9, using GSL, you're able to express those in a much simpler way. And really, again, what we're trying to do is have the policy creator themselves be able to, if not author rules, at least understand them without having to get that developer skill set involved. So, trying to take what's kind of a very, very low level and detailed assessment or test and bubble it up to a level that's easily understandable, even by a policy creator. So that's just two of the examples. I think really what we're trying to do is make these features, these perspectives a little bit more accessible to your standard sort of sysadmin.
Thanks, Patrick. Second question is, how does BlueSky Security Analytics and Compliance Service scale, and how does it work in a multi-cloud environment? So yeah, I guess you touched on that a bit earlier, but can you just go into a bit more detail?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the scale question is a really good one. I think, with competing solutions that require you to, for example, load agents within workloads, they can scale, but certainly there's a limit, right? Because Dome9 integrates at that deep API level, the perspective that the tool set has. I mean, you saw within the compliance side where we can measure not just workloads, right? We're far beyond the kinds of resources that can contain workload agents. In a hosted database, for example, there's no opportunity to load an agent. So that API integrated approach really gives Dome9 a very, very wide perspective over all sorts of things. IAM, again, AWS and key management. S3 storage bucket security, within the Azure side, virtual machines, load balancers, all sorts of different kinds of resources, and very, very quickly, right? So from a scale perspective, Dome9 really scales with your efforts. There's never any need to come back and have Dome9 do anything differently. Dome9 is continuously scanning your environment, recognizing new security groups, new instances, new database as a service instances that come online continually. And that's one of the reasons that we leverage the public cloud in the first place, right? Is this quick time to provision, ultra dynamic infrastructure, and Dome9 has a consistent perspective on all of that, a consistent and up-to-date perspective on all of that.
Fantastic, thank you. The next question is, can we get a view on the outbound access security groups like internet access?
Yeah, so within the Clarity perspective, if you remember, we had both the orange lines for ingress and the blue lines for egress, right? So what I didn't show you was actually I did, I think, when we looked at the individual security group based on the compliance engine findings. But for every security group, you can look at the complete ingress and egress rule sets, and actually the network ACL rule set as well if you're using that. In the inbound and outbound direction for any security group, and you can do that for any resource. So if a resource is assigned to, like the example within Clarity, 2 or 3 or 5 security groups, we'll combine all those. We'll kind of mishmash those together and give you the resulting what we call effective or cumulative rule set, both in the inbound and outbound direction within each security group or instance or any resource protected by a security group. So Clarity will give that to you in a visual way, but under the protected assets menu under network security, you can get that for any particular resource as well.
Fantastic. And finally, is there an easy way to build rules and controls? I guess it ties into this question a little bit. Is there an easy way to build rules and control compliance automation based on a region requirement, like you showed before, where you had the different countries with different postures?
Yeah, there's a couple ways of doing that. You can take, so we're talking about the compliance and governance side, which is probably where you would most likely, have that goal. You can run any of those, what we call rule bundles, as you saw me do. I run it against a whole account. You can do that sort of against a particular region. That's one way to do it. The other way is to build that region specificity right into the rule itself. So, I can write a rule that says something like, application load balancer where region equals US East 1 should have very specific tags, right? And even if I run that against my whole account, I'm going to tease out the detail that ALBs or security groups or instances that belong to one particular region must have a certain condition. So even in the expressiveness of that GSL language, you can build in sort of region-specific dependencies. And that's really key, right? Because, of course, one region might have different data security sort of governance or mandates or rules than others. And you can definitely write that right into the rule language using GSL.
Fantastic, thank you so much. That concludes the questions that we've got at the moment. If you'd like to find out more, contact your account manager or the Cloud Customer Success Center with the email addresses that you see here. Additionally, if you'd like to try the product, you can do so and register a trial at, and we'll send that email, sorry, it's up the top here, go.dome9.com/free trial-westcon.html. You can actually get a free trial of the product. On that note, this concludes our presentation today. We'd like to thank you for your participation, time and interest, and Patrick in particular and the team at Dome9 Security for their support. We wish you all a very good afternoon and bye for now.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.